Hey everybody, Frenchy Pow here. While there's a lot of confusion going around on climate change and the changing environment around us, we run into a couple problems. First off is we often get a tunnel vision focused on carbon emissions. All right, it makes sense. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere warms the planet, which causes a bunch of problems. But we often get too focused on that, we ignore the plethora of other issues that plague our planet at large. The other issue is we get into a lot of victim blaming, whether it's the top 100 companies that are responsible for 70+% of all carbon emissions, or the personal, private carbon footprint of the individual. Regardless, demand necessitates supply, right? And the choices that we make, while they might not be globe changing, do impact our locality and the locality of others around the world. So I want to take a video to address 10 practical things, very practical things that you and I can do to make a positive difference. So let's take a moment, broaden our vision from just carbon emissions, look at some of the problems and some things that you can do either today or this week about them. The first issue I want to talk about involves this sweet potato. Very important crop, these sweet potatoes. They'll definitely keep you fed and nourished. But if you notice this sweet potato, it's got a bad spot. Oh no! Maybe I shouldn't have bought it. Maybe I should have. You see, the nice thing is this sweet potato is going to get eaten either tomorrow or the day after that. So this little bad spot just gets cut off and it's not a problem. But what is the problem is food waste. Now, it's estimated that we produce enough food in the world already to feed 10 billion people, and there's only 8 billion of us. Well, a lot of people also go hungry in the world, so what happens to all that food? Well, there's a lot of issues with supply chain and connecting the food to the people, but one of the big issues is also food waste. There's a lot of good food out there that maybe it doesn't look perfect. They say the perfect look for a sweet potato is a brick. It's not too big, not too small, fits in the oven. But this one's a little wonky, and it's, like I said, it's got that bad spot. Or maybe the pepper's a little too wilted for you to want to buy it. Or, the banana's a little too straight. Millions of bananas are thrown away just because they're not the right shape. Well, what you can do is go to the grocery store knowing what you're going to cook that day or tomorrow and stick with it. Then you can find borderline produce that's still good for those days. And maybe you cut a little piece off. It's better than the whole thing going to the dumpster. So consider buying borderline produce for some recipes or food that is still good but may not look perfect. By doing this, well, you can leave more perfect looking food for those who don't know about the issue yet. So consider it, and in that way, we can address food waste. Secondly, we face the issue of wealth inequality and that of poverty. Money is a big issue for many people around the world, and oftentimes it feels like there's not much we can do about that. But there's something small that you can, and that is using cash instead of a card. Now, how does that work? Well, every time you use a debit card or a credit card, a small fee off of your transaction goes to big business or, in a sense, a credit card company somewhere or a bank. And that money leaves the community. Now, it's not taken from you, it's taken from the business. And if you get rewards for using your card, well, they just paid you to take from that business and line their pockets. So if every single transaction takes money out of a community and sends it to a company, well, over time, with many people making more and more transactions, that slowly is like a leaky pipe for the finances. And while you may seem like you benefit off of it, you really aren't. And so consider using cash, especially at small institutions or mom and pop places. And in that way, we can help keep money within the communities, make it last longer. And, every time we buy something from somebody, well, we don't need to involve a middleman. So consider cash instead of card. Thirdly, I'm here by this mulberry tree, less than a year old and quite taller than me already. I want to address three issues: topsoil loss, which is what it sounds like when the topsoil washes away, usually through erosion, or blows away; eutrophication, which is a fancy word to say the nutrients leaching out and into waterways, causing things like algal blooms, which can harm fisheries and aquatic wildlife; and then also health. Health is a big one. I mean, it's hard to make decisions that are good for the climate, that are good for the environment, if you yourself aren't very healthy or well. And so addressing these things can be covered by one added benefit, and that is eating tree crops. Now, they're one of the most, if not the most sustainable foods out there. Trees are good for the environment, and food that's good for the environment generally grows on trees. Now, while that isn't always the case, for example, electricity can come from renewables, but it often comes from fossil fuels as of right now. But just because it comes from fossil fuels in bulk doesn't mean it can't come from renewable sources. While many orchards can be quite bad for the environment and can be water guzzlers, trees can easily be grown sustainably. And so eating more foods that come from trees can be edging us more into not only a healthier diet, places that have higher fruit consumption often have healthier populations. Because you're not plowing up the ground every single year, it reduces topsoil loss. And because the ground is healthier and better held together, far fewer nutrients wash away. And so by eating tree crops, whether it's nuts, fruits, or other foods, can go a long way into having a better diet, both for you and for the planet. Some of the major problems we face are resource scarcity and overconsumption. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, there's enough in the world to supply everyone's need, but there's not enough to supply everyone's greed. Now, if you've ever seen prices go up on items or just seen supply chain issues, oftentimes those are the first symptoms of resource scarcity. But we're going to be coming into a time of far greater resource scarcity as climate changes and as people consume more and more with ever more efficiency. Now, if you've ever heard of Global Overshoot Day, it's a day that we have gone past and surpassed the amount of renewable resources in the world. And every single year, that gets a little sooner and sooner in the year. So, what can we do about that? Well, I'm not saying you have to give up everything in life. But what I am saying is you could focus more, especially around times where people really buy goods, like think Black Friday or think Christmas or any of the holidays, as gifts, whether to yourself or to others. See if you can buy more services instead of goods. So, paying for things like experiences, whether it's movie tickets or someone wants to take a certain class, or maybe go skydiving or try something new like that. These services aren't always better. Some services can be quite resource intensive, but there are some out there that reuse certain materials. They don't need to buy and throw away new stuff. I mean, think about how much stuff you or I, or just in general, people buy, use for a short while, and then throw away. We see a great amount of this addressed in movements like zero waste or the minimalist movement. But by buying services, not only can you have memories that will last far longer than some of these simple, cheap goods, but you'll be doing a service to address resource scarcity and overconsumption. And our fifth point is right over here. It didn't take me long walking along the side of our road to find this. Plastic. No way around it. Every single time I see one of these things, I think that there is someone's personal choice to buy it or to accept it. Now, do there need to be alternatives to plastic? Yeah, there do. There are. We need alternative options. We need alternative options. But until then, things like bringing your own water bottle to places, driving around with a set of silverware, whether it's in your backpack or in your vehicle, so that if someone offers you plasticware at a restaurant to say, no, thank you, I've got my own. Refusing is our greatest strength against plastic waste. And just because you throw it out doesn't mean it's gone, it just becomes somebody else's problem. So until we turn off the tap on plastic and stop producing it, we need to work on consuming it less. And so maybe then we'll all live in a less polluted world, and that would be nice. Tightly linked with much of what we've talked about already is a term called ecotoxicity. And that's pretty much a fancy word to say a lot of pollution that ends up in the environment. Now, it can come from things like industrial runoff, or it can come from, everyday pollution. And to solve that, or at least help, you can go on a walk. Now, walking itself might not help, but if you walk with a plastic bag that you found or that you happen to have, as you walk, you can come across trash. Maybe you can also walk with gloves or one of those little claspers to pick up that trash, or just stick with the ones that look clean enough to touch. Either way, you'll be removing the trash from the environment, and that'll help clean up things a bit. Now, if you've been refusing all plastic and you don't happen to have a plastic bag, I've walked around with 5-gallon buckets before, or just even a smaller can or bucket, so that somehow, in some measure, you can leave your walk having left the place cleaner than before you went on it. So consider going on a walk with something to carry the trash in and reduce ecotoxicity. Now I'm here with some filtered rainwater, and when you collect and filter your own water, you realize water is life. And many places around the world rely on non-renewable, scarce resources. Now, please don't cut back on the amount of water you're drinking. That won't really make a substantial impact at all. You only consume so much. But what does make an impact, even more so than our showers or our washing machines, is the food we eat. See, much of the food that we eat is trucked in from maybe California's Central Valley or irrigated farms. And there's some things that really consume a lot of water that if you cut back on just a little bit at least, saves an awful lot of non-renewable water in those regions. Number one that I'm going to say is meat consumption. And while it's not necessarily the meat that the cow drinks and then urinates out, unless, of course, you're filling up their watering trough with aquifer water, well, it's usually the irrigation that goes into things like alfalfa that then is only fed to cows or livestock. And so by reducing consumption of meat upstream, you reduce non-renewable water resource consumption. So that can be a big one. The plant version would be rice. It's estimated somewhere around a third of all fresh water goes just to rice consumption alone. So, or rice production alone. So, by reducing, not necessarily cutting out entirely, the amount of rice that you consume, and by reducing the amount of meat that you consume, for somebody somewhere, you can save an awful bit of water. Now I'm here by this baby coconut palm that we planted, and it's just now starting to poke its head up and put on new growth. And that ties in with our 8th solution: biodiversity loss, food security, and air pollution. All really serious stuff. Well, This one might not be able to do right away, or maybe even this week, but something to definitely consider is planting a food tree. Now, a food tree provides food not just for you and those who eat it, but also for wildlife, assuming you don't spray it with a bunch of poison sprays. It also helps filter the air. As dust goes through, it collects on the leaves, and then the leaves drop and add it to the soil. So it works in tandem with helping against air pollution. And then, of course, food security, because when that tree ultimately produces food, like this coconut here behind me, you'll have something to eat. And hopefully, especially being a tree, you won't just have food for yourself, but you'll have enough food to share. So consider planting a food tree to aid in those three issues. Now, human rights and care for the environment go hand in hand. It's really hard to care for the environment if you can't demonstrate that you even care for other people. So, one of the things when addressing modern day slavery is actually reducing shrimp consumption. Now, why shrimp? Well, 90% of shrimp is estimated to be imported in the United States, where I'm from. And majority of that is hand peeled and not at factories where people are willing to do it. Instead, it's at sheds often located in Thailand but also located elsewhere where migrants are forced to hand peel these, having their passports taken and being refused to ever leave as they pay off insurmountable debt. This being said, not all shrimp comes from these places, but even if a place is certified humane and selling shrimp, it's very easy to mix slave labor shrimp into those batches. And it has been found in places like Walmart, Whole Foods, Red Lobster, Olive Garden, all 50 states across the United States and elsewhere around the world by major brands that have no idea that this is going on. So, reducing shrimp consumption, maybe at those buffets or food that you order at takeout, could go towards helping reduce human slave labor. Now, with it being such a big issue, I'm not going to be entirely ignoring carbon emissions. But I want to bring something to your attention that not a lot of people talk about, and that is that you yourself can sequester carbon. And what do I mean by sequestering carbon? Because that term gets thrown around a lot, but it's really sketchy if you get into it. What I mean by sequestering carbon is removing carbon dioxide, or carbon actually, from the carbon cycle. Now you might think, oh, well, you said planting trees. That removes carbon from the carbon cycle? No, it doesn't. You see, trees are part of the carbon cycle. They uptake carbon when they grow, and then they die or get burned up, and they release that carbon back into the air as carbon dioxide as they decompose. So they took it, stored it, and then released it again. And they never really got rid of any carbon from the cycle. And we have this problem that we keep adding novel carbon to the cycle when we burn fossil fuels. So, what's the solution? How can we remove it? Well, ironically, by burning stuff. Oh, that's really weird. Didn't you just say that trees release carbon back into the atmosphere when they burn? Well, yeah, if they burn completely. But what's interesting is if you create char, which is you burn stuff and then say you have a bonfire and you're burning all this scrap wood that doesn't have chemicals in it, and you're burning brush, and it gets into this roaring fire. Most of what's going up in flames is actually other chemicals in the wood, like hydrogen or oxygen. Not much of the carbon. Most of the carbon is actually released when it starts to turn into embers and when it starts to turn into ash. That's when it gets to really react with the oxygen in the atmosphere and release as carbon dioxide. But if you interrupt that process by dousing it with water, you get this char. And char is almost entirely carbon. And what's amazing about it is it doesn't decompose for hundreds to maybe thousands of years. And in fact, if you dig through the soils with a microscope, you can often find bits and pieces of char that have just broken further and further. And that's not necessarily a bad thing like it is with microplastics. Rather, with char, it's very porous, so it holds on to water in the soil and increases water holding capacity. It also aerates the soil and gives homes for microorganisms that help build soil. So it's actually an amazing soil additive by just being something as simple as carbon. So if you have a fire at home of organic material and you douse it before it turns into ash, you lock it up as carbon that is truly removed from the carbon cycle. And while you sent a bunch of gases like hydrogen and oxygen back up into the air and small amounts of carbon dioxide, that would have gone up anyway when the wood decomposed. So, storing carbon this way can be done by almost everybody so long as you can make a fire. And it's a good way to help us all address carbon emissions. I just threw that in my garden because, it's a great soil additive. So, and lastly, but not least, education. Education is a big problem when it comes to the environment and the world at large because, simply put, people don't know what positive changes they can make. If you ask the average person, what can you do to make a positive impact on the environment? They might say, well, not using a plastic straw. While noble, that's hardly a big change, and it doesn't really address some of the big issues. So, sharing videos like these or finding other ones online, whether it's the library of YouTube or the wealth of information that's on Google, sharing videos like these can be crucial to informing individuals on how they can make positive changes so that their small sliver of the world might be a better place. It's been a pleasure. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments below what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong, or what you think I missed. I look forward to reading them. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.